Good evening, viewers, and welcome to another Live and Leash show. Delighted to be joined by a filmmaker and a documentary maker, and he has more strings to his bow than that, and we'll talk about that later. We're delighted to be joined by Shay Mary Doyle. Shay, good evening.
How are you?
Great, great, great. Now, the name first. We can't go any further than discussing the name. It's unusual.
It is. The name Mary, I presume, is when you're talking about it. They're scattered around Waterford and they pop up here, there, and everywhere. There's not an awful lot, but I'm one of them. In a way that my mother's name was Mary, and they were a Dublin working class family, grew up in Crumlin, and I was one of 12 children, so I used to get farmed out sometimes to my granny Mary in Crumlin, and when I was there locally on the streets, I was Shay Mary, and when I went home, I was Shay Doyle. And then later on, when I went into film, or theatre, I started using Shay Mary, and and then my father said, "Where's my name?" So I said, "Okay." So I went back to Shay Doyle in film as well, and eventually I just kept the three names. So um, and I also kind of like that idea of having my mother and my granny, because I was closer to the Marys in a way. They were very like a family from the Libertines, lots of friends, lots of opinions on life, lots of history. You know?
Yeah, so you were one of the original double-barreled names, so because it's becoming a
Yeah,
trend. I think you've started a trend, Shay.
well, I know. Well, that's what I was going to say to you. At one point, way back then, when I did go back to Shay Mary on the film, I went to Shay Mary, then I went Shay Doll, then I went Shay Mary Doll, and then somebody actually said to me, "You're a pretentious asshole with your double barrel name." I said, "Oh fuck!" So I reduced it down back to Shay Doll, and then everybody, lots of other people, kind of say, bring it back." So it came back and it stayed. But yeah, it's now very hip. I was in at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. In at the beginning, you started the trend.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's very distinctive. It's good for your brand.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, a lot of people like it. It's funny when anytime you're on the phone, I always have to have it because a lot of people call me Mary by mistake. So I have to always on the phone say it's Shay, S-E, Mary, as in Christmas, Meoy, Doyle, and then they get it. Yeah.
This is it. The merry Shay indeed.
Yes,
The
yes.
merry Shay indeed. But I mean, at the start, am I right in summing you up as a filmmaker and a documentary maker? I mean, how do you describe yourself, Shay?
Well, I suppose I mainly would say I'm a documentary filmmaker. I direct documentary films. That was always my passion. I had worked a little bit in drama earlier on, and I was a film editor, but I hated sets where drama was going on because it just everybody was most of the day just sitting around. Got to adjust the makeup, got to adjust this. Whereas when I made the first documentary, I realized that it's happening all the time. It's not it's not artifice. It's real, and you have to develop the skills how to capture that, and that's not easy. And in some people it's a natural ability, but that sort of thing of knowing where the conversation is and where to bring it, or visually, what do I want to see here? And trying to make use of everything that's visually around you to help the story you're making. So I found I was very well suited at. Before that, I had worked in theatre in the Project Arts Centre in Dublin with Jim Sheridan, Gabriel Byrne, and Liam Neeson. And that's where we all started our journey. And a lot of them, as you know, became movie actors and directors. And I went to documentary, not as lucrative, but as equally rewarding.
So, it's fair to say so? You were part of a golden generation.
Well, I think we were part of a generation, and the best generations are the ones that don't know that they are a golden generation in a way. And I suppose the generation for for like Dublin was a great Ireland was a kind of great place, but it had its problems, as you know. There was a kind of veil of you know in essence, all those things we touched on a bit, like emigration, and but this, I think that when the outside world came into our, then things really became interesting. You know, I think that emigration to Ireland, and I'm in a country that's trying to stop it. I think really changed the landscape. But also those early days, particularly in Windmill Lane when you two were recording and Moving Hearts and Pranksteve, and then you had bands coming over like UB40 recording in Dublin. All of a sudden, Dublin was taking its place on the cultural stage of the world. You know? So it was very exciting to me. But we weren't aware of that. In the Project Gabriel will tell you we were all working on shares, you know. And I think it was when John Berman came to make Excalibur, and Gabriel got his first performance in that, as did Liam Neeson, and I think Neil Jordan, uh, John Bourne invited him to write a scene. So there was, it was a good time. The, those early '80s or whatever, it was a good time if you were creative, you know, and that there were more doors open.
Absolutely, more doors opening. I mean, I got a taste of that era. I watched a wonderful documentary on Phil Lynott during the
Yeah,
week.
yeah,
And did you know? I mean, I know we're sidetracking here completely. Did you
yeah.
ever meet Phil?
I did, yes. And in fact, it's really got showing age now. I worked as a roadie when I was 16 on a couple of gigs, particularly in a place called the Moulin Rouge, where the band was Skid Row, and that was Phil's first band. And also, one of my great friends, Frank Murray, grew up with Phil and was looked after him, and he went on later to manage the Pogues and so forth. And so I was very aware of Phil, and then I met him a few times when I was in London or whatever. I didn't know him well, but I was in his company, grateful for that. I thought he was a beautiful artist. My friend who directed that film, Emma Reynolds, I haven't seen it yet because it was supposed to be on here then, COVID, and I didn't want to see it on TV. But we're actually showing the film in 10 days' time in the Irish Cultural Centre, so I'm dying to see it on the big screen. You know, but yeah, Phil was, for me, Phil was uh, the great Phil Lynott from Dublin. And in a way, going back to what you were saying earlier, that he was the first, I think, to break through the English rock scene, if you like. We not only did we have an Irish band doing well, but he was black, and which was, I tell people over here at that time in Ireland, there was really only a handful of black people that one was aware of. One of them was Phil Lynott, the other was Paul McGrath, and one or two more. You know, so uh, uh, we brought over two black actors to do a play in the project once, two very handsome black men for a play about Vietnam. And walking around the streets of Dublin, people would just stop and stare. You know, it's just
It,
so.
yeah.
So how Phil, but Phil somehow color never affected his life, his relationship with our society. They just loved him from the day he spoke or he sang a song.
No, you mentioned the Irish Cultural Centre. Rosalind Scanlon reached out to us earlier from the Cultural Centre to let us know that you made a documentary film about four young Port Arlington men from the travelling community. And would you like to share it, which we have?
Yes,
It's a wonderful film, and of course, I was doing a little bit of research. You didn't have a budget, more or less, so you shot it on your phone.
yeah.
Like,
Um,
how was that the first time to shoot something like that on a phone for you? And how did you find the process?
well, I kind of had I'd filmed a little bit just on the phone, but not in any serious way. But I was in Abbey Leeds Heritage Centre. Somebody said somebody wants to meet you. It was a lady called Lillian Ash, one of the most wonderful people I've ever met. And I was saying to people that if ever there's a nomination for Person of the Year that does work in our society, she should be the one. You should get her on the show.
Well said.
Extraordinary.
Well
So she said,
said, Shay.
you make films. I said, I do. He said, would you make a film for me about some traveler boys? I said, maybe. So we chatted a bit. And I asked about the budget. It was kind of, you know, she had a few bob. And I think over there called for a rag. About three people gave a couple of £100. I don't know what was involved. But I said, look, I'll do it, but I'll just have to do it on I'll do it on my iPhone. And and the only other caveat I put in, I said to Lillian was, I don't want to interview people talking about these boys. I want these boys to control the whole film, you know, for it to be their story. So she went with that, and she got in touch with the boys, and they were going to tell their story, and they were going to go and visit some relations and talk about their lives. And they were four young boys, two Neds, a Jim, and I can't remember the other lad. But the Gardaí have this youth outreach thing. It's where, in this case, young travelers were having problems in society, whether, just being bull boys or trouble or whatever. And they go on this course, and Lillian and a couple of other people work with them quite intensely. And they must come there so many days a week, and they're on some sort of scheme. And so that's what I came into. I just met these four lads, and so
Yes.
in a lot of ways, there was some things we went to see their granny. Do you want to meet their granny, Maggie, Cash, who lives in Abbey Leaks? Some of the scenes were just me. They didn't know, even know, they didn't even know what I was doing. Like, they were having chips, and I filmed them having chips. I went to see Ned's dad, Cash, in the house in Port He sang some great songs. He had made some model covered wagons and so forth. But there was the main lad, if you like, and I know I'm saying that in terms of the other lads, but who took over the film, if you like, which was Ned, the oldest boy. Very, very forceful, very, very strong to Doyle, very opinionated. A traveller boy. I'm a traveller boy. And he was proud of all that. But he also realised that he had got into trouble and why he was on the course. So he kind of, the other lads were maybe a slight bit more shy, but he kind of led. So I just, something like, again, going back to making documentaries, the screen, the camera loved Ned, so that, let him work his way through. So that was really it. It was a very, very little simple film I made while in my daughter's house, Tara, in Abbey Leaks. Um, and then I cut it together and we showed it in the local heritage centre. And the Gardaí came along, and it was a nice little, and all the traveller family came along, and it was a great night for them to be in the cultural centre. The whole that probably had never happened before. And the film was a success locally. It won the Gardaí Portlaoise Gardaí Award that year, and um, and in a way, I was thinking to myself, this is a very simple little film. And in some ways, I was embarrassed because I shot on an iPhone. I didn't have great sound. I didn't have which I have now. I do loads of stuff on the iPhone, but I now have a rig. But I literally just had the phone in my hand, and that caused. So I was a little bit embarrassed by the film as a filmmaker. And then when I came over here, and I was making all these films. And then one day I showed the film to Rosalind, and she started crying. And I said, "Oh," he said, "Oh, this is amazing. This is about young boys, who have, emotional problems. And these people, this is a great film." So then we put it up on ICC Digital just last week. And then before I knew it, the Leinster Express had it on the front page. I'm talking to you. It's had about 12,000 hits so far on the ICC Digital platform, if you like. So, in a way, I suppose that's, as a documentary, I say you got to work with tools you have. Normally, I'd have a crew with top camera people, great sound. All I have to do is say, take the shot. But now all of a sudden, I was the one man band, trying to carry this little film home. But I've since improved on that, and as I say, made lots of films here in London. We're filming again on the iPhone. We're showing it to Portobello Film Festival, and won an award. So it's a new world for me, which I like this thing about not standing still. That instead of waiting maybe a year applying for a film about something, it takes months, applications, budgets. What are you going to do? Where is this going to get seen? and you're looking for maybe 150,000. But it goes on for so long, you kind of get worn out. Whereas this is a bit like saying if something catches my eye, I get my phone out and I can start filming almost right away. You know? And
Yeah,
to
it's
finish on that, it's funny. The chairman of the Irish Culture Centre is a man called Peter Barr Hines, but he's a kind of a nerd, a historical nerd, and he brought in some photographs to show me. And actually, there's a connection with Port Leisure about the first flight, transatlantic flight, which is from Ireland to Newfoundland,
correct.
and the captain, can't remember, the flight of the Bremen, it's called,
Correct.
and
Colonel James Fitzmaurice.
thanks very much, Captain James. So he had all these photographs and he showed them to me, and I started filming, and then I started filming over, and he didn't even know I was doing it. And in the end, we just put that film out again 2 months ago. But that film it was there in front of me. I knew how to capture it. Obviously, later on, did lots of rostrum and lots of things. But again, I think it's the only film made in deep analysis about Captain Fitzmaurice and how he got the gig. Because one guy pissed off back to Germany, had a row, and the extraordinary ticker tape parades in New York and Boston. This is like the first man on the moon, because whereas you had Alcock and Brown coming to Ireland, but the flight for aeronautical people, the flight from going the other way is the much more treacherous journey because you're going into a totally different volatile type of weather that's coming at you as opposed to carrying you.
Correct.
So again, I liked that. I made a little film about James Joyce and the period he spent in London for a year. And so I'm finding the phone very liberating. So it's not difficult. I may not make much money out of film, but if I can get even a small commission, at least I can start working without spending a year uh, talking to civil servants about what the money will be used for, what story will we get. Because the whole landscape of commission has become so complex. Whereas 10 years ago, I went in and said, well, I'm going to make a film about the making of The Quiet Man, John Ford. And it happened fairly quickly. I made a film about Jimmy Murakami, and I made it again very quickly. But now there's so much bureaucracy. It certainly wears me out.
Yes, that's where the iPhone comes in handy. It's just immediate. And you were saying off camera, you haven't, I mean, during the pandemic, you've never been as busy.
Well, this is the weird thing was that I always had a long association with the Irish culture. They bring people over from Ireland, musicians, artists. They have a wonderful centre. You'd love it, John, if you're ever in London, in Hammersmith. A lovely hall, art gallery. People go there, learn barroom, violin, Irish language. But I was showing my film about Patrick Kavanagh there. I was about to return to Ireland when COVID happened, and all of a sudden I was in a ghost town. I'm sure it's bad in Ireland, but like the city of London was like this science fiction movie, and the Irish Cultural Centre had to close a few days before St. Patrick's Day. And I put my hand up and said, "Look, guys, I know a lot about visuals and how to do this. Why don't we start up a digital station?" Because they had no digital presence. It was a venue. So we started off by some London-based musicians literally sending in iPhones of them playing at home. Then I ventured out. I made some films with a poet on location, made the James Joyce film. And all of a sudden, ICC Digital is really now one of the most successful digital platforms. It's got outreach to all across America. The films are, on YouTube or on the main or Facebook. And we also did 18 radio shows for a station in London called Portobello Radio, where I was one of the hosts. So, and Near FM in Dublin also put those shows out. Bright Side of the Road, they were called, featuring Irish music with background stories, and some of the London-based Irish musicians who are extraordinary. So yes, all of a sudden from that little, foray into Abbey League's demos bounced back to here, and it's been extraordinarily busy. And I say that knowing that a lot of my colleagues were going the total other way, particularly actors, because I move in the artists, musicians, all the feet cut right from under them. If I was talking to them, I wouldn't tell them how busy I was. So I'm just getting by, but I was literally working 7 days a week.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah,
And it's amazing. Necessity is the mother of invention. And of course, the
yeah.
silver lining is
Um,
you were forced to go in a direction you might never have gone. And look
well,
at you
it's
now.
true. Well, it's yeah. I always believed in the accidents of life. From the get-go. Like when I left school, oh, I went to tech, and then I wrote some terribly bad play with the local youth club, and somebody saw it and gave me a scholarship to some drama situation. So all these accidents happened, and then I met somebody, and they dragged me into the project. I was never one for scheming. What will I do next year? If something happened, I like it, I'll venture in there. But you get to an age where I think the age I'm at now, and I probably would have thought while exploring about Abbey Leaks that these are the last days of major activity. You're not going to go back to Dublin in a hurry. There's not a lot happening. And all of a sudden, said, "Come and show Kavanagh," and I became Kavanagh. So really, the film I made brought me back into a whole new world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm back to Traveller Tales. I have to
Yeah,
declare an interest here.
yeah.
I know the Cash family well in Port Arlington. I
Oh,
used
do
to
you?
be well. I used to be a teacher. You
Ah,
can put me in that box, and of
right.
course, I was a resource teacher for travellers in Port Arlington.
So we were
So
throwing a lot of chalk.
wouldn't be my style. I'd be too
I
I'd
know.
be too soft, Shay. I'd be too soft.
Yeah,
I'd be too
yeah.
easy going. But
Oh, was a special.
what I loved about it, Shay, what I loved about the film is I didn't hear you once. Don't take this the wrong way. I
Yeah,
didn't hear you once. It was all the young men, the four young men, and of course, um, the generation above them, and then of course their grandmother in Abilix.
yes,
And you know what? The
yes,
other thing that really got me was the singing.
yes,
I just loved the singing in it. So simple.
yes. It is, and it was funny that when Daddy Cash, if you like, sang his song, and then in the chip shop, Ned really understood. He said, "Some of them sing low, some of them sing high," and he was talking about the Travers singing style, and he really understood it. And so when he sang his song, the last song on the bog in Abbey Leaks, as he
Yes.
wandered away, I just thought this is like the Wild West. It's just beautiful. This is like an American movie, set a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
And they were four great lads. They kind of they Ned was a strong one, but the traveling community. Community is the word. I think that is their best get out card from all the problems they have. Like even Maggie saying they're good boys, telling them what to do. You know,
Yeah.
so you have that sense of community, which in a way, when I grew up in working class Dublin, that was the thing that held everything together was communities. Like the neighbor down the road, if something was wrong, people were
Yes.
helping each other out. Now
There.
that's become much more complex, with the world life we lead. But still, I think Ireland is still far ahead of everybody else because particularly in towns like Port Arlington, I believe there is a sense of people being aware of each other. I remember in Abbey Leaks there was a community garden there when I was there, and there was some refugees had come, and they were just told if you need food, go and just take it about, and then they would help uh, gardening. So I think Ireland, it's harder. I can see it's much harder for English people to get into that psyche, although lots of them are, particularly in London. But I think Ireland has that